We live in a very mysterious world, one that's filled with mystery and we cannot explain certain things. My name is Chris Fringe, and I'm a cryptozoologist and paranormal researcher. In tonight's show, we focus on the unknown, and come join me as we discuss the mystery of our world. And you're listening to The Venomous Fringe. Prepare yourselves as we dive into the madness of the mystery of our world. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to The Venomous Fringe. I'm your host, Chris Fringe, and welcome, all returning Fringeaholics and newcomers. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you guys here on this Saturday evening, and tonight's episode we're going to be talking about a very interesting cryptid. This cryptid is known as the Goatman. Now, I'm titling this The Goatman in the United States because the Goatman has been seen primarily in a few states which we'll talk about, but it's been cited all throughout the US. I haven't really seen anything that has been relevant to being seen in foreign countries, or at least in different countries. But yeah, I mean, I think for the Goatman of the U.S., because this is a cryptid that's not relatively well spoken of, and what I mean by that is you don't really hear a lot of cases of Goatman, and Goatman is kind of like ho-hum there and there when it's in discussion of cryptids, or if people are discussing Bigfoot or Dogman in this case. I know that there was a few live streams I had done where there are a few of you had asked me about Goatman, and I wanted to do an episode on it for the longest time, and I think this is a good time to do it because, not only just for the fall season, but also too, I think we can all admit that I think a lot of us are big fans of Halloween, and I think we all get into the whole discussion of fables and urban legends and myths, and of course, horror. And I'm not trying to classify this show as a horror show. It's not a horror show at all. This is a research show. This is a show of eyewitness accounts and of course discussion on what is the unknown, the truth of the unknown, if there is, what we have. So, but I think for the discussion too, also Goatman is not necessarily a relatively well-spoken creature, as I said, and it's also good to just mention and bring out to light for those who are interested, because it is something of interest, and I know not many talk about it. I know there's a lot of narrators out there that do encounters, and they do read them, and while I am split decision on a lot of that, and I'm not going to get into it, but I will say that I don't necessarily agree with all of what that content is provided of because of the discussion of it, but it appears to me that there are a lot of accounts of people who are seeing Goatman, and it's surprising because this is one of those cryptids that you would think is in the top 5, but really I think is kind of in the lower tier list, and I think only because of the fact that there's not enough evidence out there to provide that could say that is, of course, a cryptid of interest. And also, too, we get more of the encounters than we do of evidence, but I think we can kind of say that now about almost anything cryptid-wise, because we do get more. I think without reports, reports help spark the interest, and I think in Goatman's terms, there is definitely something out there of that cryptid, I think, but of explanation-wise, I don't know for sure, like every other cryptid we've discussed, but I also want to keep us open with open minds, okay? And I want tonight's show to be that sarcasm of opening of a mindset that could be very well delivered, and I think it'd be very beneficial and helpful for those out there who are curious of this cryptid and want to know more about it. And I'm going to be giving you guys in a second a brief overview of what this cryptid is. I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to share with you guys about 15 to 20 encounters of the Goatman creature. Now, I'm going to read you guys to start off some small reports, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read you guys some longer, in-depth reports, and I'm going to let you guys know what you guys think of them. Of course, a lot of the show, 50% of this show is left up to your guys' interpretation of what we discuss here. And that goes for Dogman, it goes for Sasquatch, and anything paranormal. So I was originally going to do this show tonight with another researcher, but we had to reschedule because of other commitments, and this is a last minute kind of thing, in recording. This is actually, I hate to admit this, but this is actually my 16th recording because I've been pretty stressed out lately, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not going to sit here and say why and give you another explanation on why there might be a way of discussing how we're going about the show, because really this is a last minute thing. And I was recording, I was prepping, and to make it everything, summarize it up, we had to reschedule, and I'm just trying to put out and deliver one of the most unique and best ways to explain something here. And I do apologize if the way I discuss things or the way I go about things might confuse you or keep you off track or think that I make no sense. I think maybe the way I say it might confuse you, and if you do have any questions, and specifically if it is something that I may have left you kind of sidetracked on or think that I'm wrong on, I can explain in further depth. There is an email you can contact me at, thevenomousfringe@gmail.com. You can reach me at VENOMOUSFRINGE, and you see the text right now appearing on screen. We do have 2 Facebook groups. Facebook groups are the Dogman only group. We have a Dogman discussion group. That is our discussion and research group. It's a very good group, folks. I would like for you guys to take a look at it and enjoy. I think you guys would really take a good look. And the next group is the Venomous Fringe official group. Now, folks, this is a group I'm trying to grow, and it would be very helpful if you guys can give me a boost. And if you are interested, if you're on social media and you would like to join the group, we discuss cryptids, we discuss paranormal. I haven't really touched with it lately because I've been busy with my personal life, but we would like to have you guys a part of something big and nice, and it'd be something very good too, to interact with other enthusiasts and researchers out there and hear other opinions. And that's kind of the whole basis of why I've created these groups, and it'd be very beneficial for you guys if you are wanted to take an expansion besides a YouTube outlet for the show. So think about it. And we do have a PayPal. We don't have a YouTube partnership because of the demonetization, and we've also been dealing with it ourselves. We actually tried it out, and as a result, we had gotten on the sidetrack, screwed over in a sense, and I think it's because of the discussion of what we talk about here. But at the same time, folks, if you would like to help contribute to the show, there's a PayPal. Now, we are saving up for a drone. We want to buy one of those nice high-tech fancy drones, and it's in the 1K section, and we've raised so far over 400, and we appreciate the contributors out there who've helped with that. And we want to use this drone to go out into the field and record and even live stream and see if we can get a glimpse of something out there. Now, we know the precautions and the dangers of what could lie, but it'd be also something beneficial for research purposes as well and help further exploration in certain areas. So if you could help us with that, or whether it's for equipment for the show, a new microphone, or an EVP for Paranormal, whatever you can do, if you can help us with that funds, very much so beneficial. Now, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you guys now a brief overview on the Goatman of the United States. The Goatman, a half-man, half-goat hominid, first reported in the early 50s. Last 60 years, and eyewitnesses all over the United States have been seeing an upright walking creature that lurks of evil and fright. Often chased, often attacked, animals mutilated, many of whom have claimed to have seen the Goatman have had traumatic encounters following up recurring nightmares and visions of this mysterious creature. The creature reportedly stands 8 to 10 feet tall, has brown, white, gray fur reported, and has often, when discussed, amber, blue, and red eye shine. Some say that the Goatman wields an axe, one of death. Some say that the Goatman attacks and has even killed people, and has sexually assaulted people. Now, I know a lot of you might be thinking Predator Goatman in a sense, and I'm not saying that for comedic purposes. I'm actually saying that in all seriousness because this is the internet. But, I mean, let's be fair here. I don't want to say that in a goofy purpose because we've heard before of Sasquatch sexually molesting horses and cows. And there's not one person in the chat or in general who reads this after the live show who will look at this and be like, oh, well, I mean, is that possible? And of course it is. There's no person here that can deny that. It's definitely bound to be, okay? And I'm not sitting here trying to sound like a fool. I'm simply saying this. Think of it in an open mindset. I always say to people, in order to find the right answers, we all must keep an open mind and a respectful positivity to what we want to research. And I mean, it might sound goofy, it might not, but I mean, think about it. It's the same thing with dogmen. It's possible. And I've heard some encounters of people who've claimed to have had some sort of intercourse or some sort of vision with a Goatman. And it sounds ridiculous, right? But it's apparently happened. But I think one of the more distinct features of it is the fact that this creature just eats, breathes, and smells something out of Greek mythology of the satyrs. And, you know, I think in a sense when you think of satyrs in Greek mythology, they're almost no equivalent. They're the same exact thing. There is an equivalence. They're the same exact thing. And even though that in the Greeks in that time period that was eons ago, could these be ancestors? Could these be the fallen angels, the warriors, or whatever? Or let's just say, in a sense, the flesh and blood aspect, could these just be the remaining animals, or what was a creature created by man or God? And then there's also the reports of people who've mentioned that these are animal hybrids, that these were created in a laboratory, or a mad scientist had gone array, the typical Frankenstein or Dr. Jekyll and Hyde case. So, you know, you have a whole bunch of little bit of origins there, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And, you know, I think it's interesting because wherever this creature's origin comes from, it still doesn't declare the case that this is still out there and it has an aggression. It has some sort of mindset to it, almost like it has that viciousness. But also too, I mean, goats could be vicious animals, and if this is a half goat half man, I mean, the instincts, first of all, the muscular build of a man, it's very easy. It's stronger than a bodybuilder. I'm pretty sure a goat man can easily and not to say this to disturb people, but I'm pretty sure if you put a goat man in the same room as a gorilla, a silverback to be exact, you're gonna have to also note too that the strength numbers here, it's almost equivalent, but it wouldn't surprise me if a goat man could tear a silverback to shreds. Same thing with a dog man. And I don't encourage that to endorse the violence aspect of it, but I mean, if you think about numbers and you think about weights and heights, I mean, these things are pretty damn strong. So you're dealing with something here that has a very huge muscular build, right? And then you also have, in the case of people who, when they see these things, it's a huge sign of intimidation. So then let's just take in, for example, with Dogman, you know, you have adrenaline rush coming from people who, when they see the dogman, because they're seeing something here that can easily not just kill them, but it's also something you've never seen before. I think it's the facial expressions, the fear, the fright that one possesses when seeing these things is what sets people to be terrified. It's the facial reactions, and that's what makes body language so simplistic in a sense, and it makes us transparent, and you wonder to yourself, it's like, well, what we're seeing here, could we easily explain or no? And not to get off focus of what we're discussing here, but I mean, when you look at the Goatman statistic wise, I mean, you're thinking of something that's either out of World of Warcraft, The Witcher, or even just your typical fables of fictitious tales of J.R. Tolkien or whatever. You have a series of people here, though, who are seeing this thing. And what is it? I think it is something. I think you are dealing with something here that can necessarily be of interest, or something that could just kind of be, well, it's not a guy in an outfit. If this thing is ripping the heads off of livestock and simply performing intercourse or attempts to, in a sense, or is attacking cars with full strength. I mean, you think of a goat, man. I mean, any cryptid can pick up a gun or pick up a weapon. If you believe the South American armor story with Dogman isn't a good example, or even if you go to get even in depth, you know, you have people who see it, right? And then when they see it, they just simply you know, the reactions, the time frames feel like it takes forever, but really it's only a short period of time because you're just so intrigued by what you're seeing. So let's discuss some encounters and go from there. for the narrative of what's being discussed, because for all we know, we could be well be getting hoodwinked by somebody who just wants to make a story out just for the interest or the fascination. But I mean, in many of these cases, you never may know. So when it comes to a lot of these small encounters, I just feel that there's not enough detail in them. And these were encounters that I had found, and these were encounters also, too, that I had collected and were sent to me because I had, asked a couple of people, do you have anybody who would know of any Goatman encounters? And, of course, I had collected a few, and one of these encounters actually was pretty interesting, and I'll discuss it in a second. So the first encounter we're going to talk about happened in Lily Ponds, Maryland. Now, I just want everybody to know Maryland is notorious because the Maryland Goatman, that's actually where it first started back in the 50s, and Maryland seems to be a big hotspot for the Goatman. And I'm not too far from Maryland. I'm actually about a good 700 miles away, so I'm not too far away from there. I can actually right now take a bus and en route go down off of the turnpike, just get on there and be there by 4 a.m. If I really, honestly, or even if I took a plane ticket, for God's sakes. It's only just next door, but I'm getting off sidetrack, folks. I do deeply apologize. Anyways, this story happened, in Lily Ponds, Maryland. It was around midnight. The eyewitness had left his job, and midway through the drive down this road, he was on Olin Road off of I-85. The creature that he had seen emerged and almost ran into his car. They were just about close 50 feet away when the creature turned its head slightly and leaped. It jumped across onto the other side of the road and then vanished into the night. The guy swerved, but luckily he swerved to the right around to dodge the creature, because if he had swerved left, he would have still made contact with its feet or whatever, and probably would have injured himself or the creature, and whatever could have happened next could have been catastrophic. The individual didn't believe it was a human. However, he had heard of the Goatman legend and believed it could have been that, as he had seen white horns. He couldn't give a good idea on the face, as he had swerved around the time the creature had ran out, but got a good look at the illumination of the horns due to the color. The next story happened in 1993. This one happened in Virginia. The individual was out in the woods with friends. They were bike riding, going for a swim around this creek. When, right around random, they had seen something on a hill, not too far from them, what appeared to be a giant monster that silhouetted with horns. One of the friends thought it was a devil at first and kind of was questionable about it. Another one thought it looked like a creature out of the Never-Ending Story. This creature appeared to be scoping them, as one mentioned, and was just observing what they were doing. The creature then let out an evil shriek. One appeared to be a death. The kids ran for it, and they left. They never returned. A couple of years later, one of them returned and recounts hearing mysterious snarls during the course of the day. He was going for a typical hike ride when he had heard this. Since then, they are convinced that it was the mysterious Goatman. In Altreville, 2003, a local patrolman doing his evening rounds had seen a giant white goat-looking creature on the side of the road, what appeared to be slaughtering a deer to shreds. The patrolman at first thought it was a crazy individual, somebody who was probably intoxicated or tripping on a drug. However, he realized quite soon that this wasn't an actual human being, that this was in fact something else. He flickered his sirens on and slowly had gotten close to this creature. The creature then gazed up and then looked at the patrolman, snarling away. The patrolman realized suddenly then that this creature was not actually human, but in fact some sort of monster. The patrolman ended up pulling up in reverse as fast as he could and pulling it into drive. refusing to get out of the car and interrogate, fearing that this creature would come for him, or something else far worse. The patrolman returned to the police station, did not make mention. However, in recent years he had heard recurring cases of people seeing something, in which the township has been questioned of, and as a result, it is up for debate on if this will be a continuation of what could be a cover-up, or, in general, something of interest. One little story right there that I think was interesting, and it's quite classified, and yeah, I'm not going any further, but it was in Autryville, and I mean, I for all we know, a lot of these stories that I've just explained, they're small stories. The last one, there was a little bit of detail, but if this is the case of something, I mean, it's like Montgomery Bell with Dogman. You know, the whole Montgomery Bell and the whole, you don't go out and hear the howls at night, the township and all that. So, I mean, could this be something with the Goatman? It was a very interesting case, but it caught my attention. This other case that happened, a hiker in Sedona, Arizona, in the Coconino Forest had seen a giant 8-foot devil-like creature running around. At one point, just 200 feet away, the hiker was frozen in terror and wasn't going to be moving anytime soon. The creature took one look at him, the hiker staring in confusion and terror. The creature turned its back and shrieked in a high-pitched scream and ran off into the forest. The hiker remembers seeing the eyes, and from what he described, were the eyes of death. So those are the short cases of the Goatman, and very interesting ones, I will say, and I think a lot of it really, it descends, it's incredible, because I really... Now, these next few encounters are going to be pretty interesting because they're pretty well detailed, and I think you guys will like them. This first encounter goes back to 1999. The encounter is titled as My Encounter with the Goatman. This comes from a user on Reddit. This encounter is pretty interesting, and I remember I read this encounter at one point in time, back a long time ago when I first did my first show, and it's a pretty good one. So, story goes as I followed. During 1999, I worked briefly as a vacuum cleaner salesman, and he goes on to say that the job was terrible, even though this guy obviously is talking in past context. I was working late this one particular night, and I was on a home stretch around 10 minutes from home when my old crappy cheap Ford Fiesta started to overheat. I knew the car wouldn't make it home and had no choice other than to pull into a lay on top of the big, dark, deserted mountain next to my own town. My hometown is literally the last town before just the mountain and the forest for countless miles. As I pulled into the mountain parking area with steam pouring my engine, this is 100% true by the way, a white hominid figure, obviously surprised that the car was pulling into a deserted parking space in the middle of the night, ran directly in front of my headlights as I sprinted from the edge of the clear side of the parking area into the forest on the other side. I. It had no clothes, it featured genitals and hair, just a white figure with 2 arms and 2 legs that appeared almost luminous, reflective in my lights. To say I crapped myself is a bit of an understatement. My eyes popped out of my sockets and when it ran in front of me, but then I realized I was stuck in a dead car in a deserted mountain lay by the middle of the night with no mobile phone signal, as this was back in the days when mobile phones were just starting to become popular, but large chunks of the county were missing from network coverage. I had no choice but to sit there around an hour until my car cooled down, as it gave up the ghost pretty much the second I pulled in. So I sat in my car alone, staring directly into the forest where the thing I saw had run. No weapon, no way to contact anyway, to let them know where I was, and no passing traffic to possibly flag down. During my wait in the car, I obviously started to wonder what I had seen. I knew for a fact that I had actually seen something, and it was not a trick of the light. That much was clear. I discounted sheep, horses, foxes, and any other animal that populated the Welsh mountains. I was certain as it was a 2-legged hominid, creature shape, and roughly human head, body, arms, and leg proportions. The obvious answer is that it has been some very strange man, who for some reason was wearing a white, entire body stocking. I think Charlie Green Man, It's Always Sunny. But since we were miles away from the nearest home, I was the only car around. It's highly unlikely that someone would have spent hours walking through thick forests just to hang out at a parking area in the middle of a forest wearing a unitard. Since I could rule out possible animals or humans, I had to consider the alternative, which isn't a nice thing to think about when you are stuck in a broken-down car with this creature possibly still outside. I didn't think it was aliens, as it was too tall compared to the classic look, while any type of apparition or ghost doesn't tend to run away from people when surprised. I'm not sure if there was some kind of Welsh version of a Wendigo, but if I had to categorize the encounter, this would be my number one choice. There was always the talk of satanic rituals and witches practicing in the forest when I was a kid, and also use of illegal bare-knuckle fights where people had been killed and buried there to cover up with a crime. But I didn't think too much of it at the time, and always wrote it off as superstition of rumor. But now I'm not so sure. Eventually my car cooled down enough for me to limp back home. No one really believed me when I told them what I had saw that night, and they're adamant that it was a sheep. But to this day I swear that the creature I encountered was something different, and I've been in the forest many times since camping, hiking, and even biking. And I've never seen anything like that again, but whenever I go out there, I'm always aware of the possible presence of the Goatman. So I really, this is one of those cases that I think, for some of us, it has a nice little detail to it. The guy pulls into this parking lot. Now, he's miles away. This isn't Welsh, so of course, the mountain area and the region, his town's the next one over. And this guy is seeing something here, and it basically runs across onto his headlights. Now, this is your typical Dogman Bigfoot sighting, and it just runs from point A to point B and proceeds. And it's interesting because for a couple of reasons. I think the first and biggest reason is the fact that this creature did not make eye contact, did not bother to go near this individual in his car, and just passed on and carried on in the vicinity straight ahead. And the second reason is because this individual, he was originally going to get out of the car and start to, put water into the alternator to get it to obviously get the car running again, and of course, everything to cool down or whatever in the prop barrel too. But anyways, to make a long story short, he wasn't going to do that because obviously going out there and dealing with this creature, it could have been something dangerous, and I don't blame him. But the fact that this guy sat in that car for an hour and he did not happen to, obviously intimidation, he was definitely terrified. But the fact of just sitting there, I wouldn't know how to respond to that and how to deal with it, because personally it sounds to me like something that I would personally be a little creeped out by. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, when you're out there and you have something that you see and you cannot explain or you don't even know what it is, you're dealing with something that it could easily be something very catastrophic. And I guess maybe what I'm trying to say and trying to find the right wording is that we don't know what really these things are. And I think really when you're looking at it, you wouldn't want to know what to do in such a situation. So that was actually a pretty interesting story. I really thought that was a good one. Okay, so these next encounters are going to be a little bit more detailed. This first one comes as follows. One night about 10 years ago, me and my best friend decided to stop by a local hangout in ours in Bowie to smoke a cigarette before he dropped me off at home. We grew up here and spent our early days wandering around the railroad tracks and woods, smoking and drinking as children do. This one last spot is a railroad overpass at 450 to I-97. There's a parking lot and a small area to smoke a cigarette. We go on the tracks and we're facing the parking lot, so the overpass to our left and the tracks go on to our right. This way we're still barely in the glow from the yellow parking lot lights. Now we're smoking, and he's talking, but the entire time I'm focused to my right, peering down to this track because I have the strangest feeling. I didn't know what it was until later, and it was the feeling of being watched by a predator, which I've never experienced before. After about 2 minutes, we're almost done with our cigarettes, and a helicopter flies right above us, seemingly at tree level, with the spotlight briefly going right over us coming from the direction of the overpass. Not 5 seconds later, I hear the gravel shift between the tracks, and I look towards the overpass. Standing right in the center of the overpass, there is this giant silhouette. Now, since it is dark and it's under the overpass, I can only see its silhouette. It's about 8 or 9 feet tall, or burly looking. It appeared as if its head was attached to its torso, completely bypassing any semblance of a neck. That way the Super Jack dudes look. It was huge, and we only looked at it for about a second before I said, "Let's go now." Now we were hurtling, starting to rush away, and we hear the gravel more closer, and not 3 seconds later, we both hear the most demonic and horrifying multiple-pitch screech, literally right behind our heads. It came from no more than a foot behind us. So, of course, we book it to his car, and no, we didn't look back because you are effing kidding me, to get real. We get to his car, and the funny thing is, this lanyard got stuck around steering the wheel. And when we pulled out, his keys pulled out of the ignition, and as it turned to the steering wheel. Anyways, we drove around for about an hour, and the only thing we can say is, what the heck was that? And that's the encounter with the Goatman. A week later, he's hanging out with a friend, call him Andy. Andy had spent a lot of time in the woods, and he was telling us about how last week the cops were out in the woods because they heard screams and thought a woman was being raped. Now, I asked him if they had any helicopters out, and he said yes. Asked him what day it was, and it was the same night we saw the Goatman. So we told him our experience, and he was like, yeah, that was him. So, that is the Bowie case of the Goatman. Now, I find that case to be quite of an interest because, again, much like the Patrolman case in Autryville, you have what appears to have been an investigation of some sorts that happened in the process because people thought that there was someone getting raped. And ironically, in the Goatman stories, you hear about the Goatman rape, you hear about the Goatman making these screaming noises very similar to that of a screeching female. So I find that to be quite interesting. I will say this, though. I find that, the fact that this was going on and there's helicopters and stuff, it makes you wonder if maybe there's more of a deep investigation to it. But I'm not going to go ahead and already point out the obvious. But it's quite interesting, I guess. And what I'm getting at is I find all of those reports of people who, when they see, like, the Goatman in an instance, and they notice and they say, well, it appears to has no neck. Now, in the earlier reports I talked about, there was no description of that. But I think it was because it wasn't clearly visible. And it was probably due to the fact of the situation, but also at the same time, this was also at night, so you couldn't really get a good look. It may have had a neck, it may have not. It stood 8 to 10 feet tall, so it's a pretty tall cryptid for its own sake. Now, the next story I want to talk about is an encounter that happened during the holiday season, actually. It was a cold Thursday evening about 17 years ago. Now, just so you guys know, this was posted 3 years ago on Reddit, so we're going back into 2016, so that means that this encounter took place literally in 1999. It was a cold Thursday evening about 17 years ago. I was driving down a dark back road with a friend, and we were just driving, smoking a little herb and talking about the upcoming Christmas break. My friend Sean was going to Florida to spend time with relatives over the break and wouldn't shut up about how nice it was going to get out of the Minnesota for a couple weeks. While he's rambling on about his trip, I was sort of spacing out. It had started to snow and the flakes were rushing at the windshield like machine gun bullets, and the trees on both sides were so dense that it gave you the feeling that you were driving through a tunnel. With how dark it was, and the snow coming down, not to mention the fact that it was relatively high, I was thinking that this must be like to do warp speed at the USS Enterprise. Mind you, I was stoned. I was still thinking about Star Trek, and more specifically about how hot Counselor Deanna Troi he was when my friend half-heartedly punched me in the shoulder. "Dude, this crap is gone," he says, handing me an empty bowl. I looked at him and I just shook my head, and I loved Sean, but he was a cheap you-know-what. Give me a second and I'll find somewhere to pull over. I scanned the area, and not too much further down the road was a country park that is normally empty, where we could stop to reload. Even if there was anyone there, we didn't care. I pulled into the park, and I had seen one car on the far end, so I pulled over and parked, hit my dome light, and filled the bowl. Right as I'm turning off on the dome light, Sean grabs my arm and coat and starts shaking it. Dude, did you effing see that?" he exclaims. Still shaking my arm with one hand and frantically pointing off to the right of us, I look, and all I could see was this dark figure. In fact, I couldn't even tell if the damn thing was alive or if it was moving, but I saw something. I kept squinting to see if I could maybe get a better look at whatever it was, and replied, "I don't see anything but a blur. Should I drive towards it?" Sean paused for a second. I don't know. Maybe it's just a moose. Now, I've seen enough moose, and these things are mean. Mean to the point where they won't have a problem stopping your car if you feel the desire to do so. I decided against it. The park kind of made a loop anyways, so that when we left, we'd get a little closer and we'd still keep our distance and not to piss off the beast. As we started to get closer, I got a clearer look, and whatever it was, we definitely saw. It had horns and some sort, but looked like antlers. But not antlers. I kept creeping, and we were at the closest we'd get to it, when whatever the heck this thing was stood up, that it grew another 3 to 4 feet. We were passing it when Sean screamed, "Holy hell, what the heck is that?" My heart started to race, and I looked into the review, and I didn't see anything. I stopped. "What the heck are you doing?" Sean yells again. "And get us the heck out of here." Mind you, both people are under the influence of marijuana. My heart was racing, and I was curious. I threw the car into park, got out, and started to walk in the direction of where the creature had been. I stopped about 10 feet away, and from my car I heard grunting and scratching coming from behind me. I turned and saw 2 bright red eyes 20 yards ahead of us and hovered about 7 to 8 feet off the ground. I ran, and jumped into my car and put it in drive and gunned it. Right for those 2 red dots, emanating just feet before me. What the heck? The heck, slow down, as Sean says. I didn't slow down. I got to where the red eyes should have been, and as if they would have been consumed by the shadow they were hiding in. They were gone, and wet mud had sprayed across the windshield, and as I bottomed out of my car into a ditch. Thankfully, it just started snowing, so there wasn't any of the ground yet, minus the light dusting, and we would have been stuck 10 miles outside of town, and back then, no one had cell phones. I stopped and just stared at the edge of the tree line, less than 10 feet away. I didn't know what I had just seen, nor I know why I got the overwhelming compulsion to run it the heck over. I backed out of the ditch and back onto the driveway, put the car in drive, and pulled up into the road. I nod and take a right to head toward the main highway that led directly into town. Our nerves seemed to be returning to normal, so I picked up and sparked that bowl, and I looked over to Sean and motioned for him to take the pipe. That was some weird thing. Did we actually just see that? As Sean, of course, grabbed his bowl. I wasn't getting out of the car right there. No chance. I was maybe 3 to 4 miles from town and less than a mile from the main highway, so I decided I'd just wait until we got to the gas station to look at my car. It took less than 10 minutes before we got to the gas station, and when we arrived, I got out of the car to check the roof, and when Sean went inside and got a soda. There were 2 separate indentions, each of an angle of one another, kind of like if there were footsteps. It looked like someone just took a hammer at the top of my vehicle and hit it. I thought about the damage and then what about just happened, and I decided to forget about it. I never again had an experience like that, and since moved out of Minnesota. I have heard of plenty of other stories about the creature that apparently likes to mess with motorists out of some sort of the less traveled roads. But no one has been able to really identify what it is, and the stories often vary. One thing that seems to be common among them, though, are the red eyes. I was just reminded by the other Goatman story posted and felt the obligation to share. A pretty long story, but a pretty well-detailed story. I mean, of course, you know, in many of these situations and many of these testimonies, I know a lot of people could be easy to skeptical and say, well, you know what, these guys, apparently they were on THC, they definitely were either stoned and they were probably seeing things, but you know what, marijuana doesn't really make you hallucinate. If you look at the scientific facts behind it, I mean, unless you take something that's laced or it has some sort of psychedelic in it, and I'm not necessarily, you might ask yourself, well, how do you know this one, Fringe? And before one goes ahead and quits the judge, I'm not saying that I've tried it, I'm not saying I've tested it, but you know what, I did a report on it in my biology class, so hey, but maybe that was, of course, a long time ago, but point being, guys, you know, I've never heard a case of someone getting paranoid. Like, you can get paranoid, but I've never heard a case of someone hallucinating, or unless they've taken more than just the devil's lettuce, as they say. And I mention this because I don't think these guys were relatively, you know, hallucinating. I believe that these guys were paranoid, but if they did see something like this, I feel that this is a great story, a great little story for horror purposes, but if it is true, because there's no photographs of the indents. This is 1999. I don't think they had a Kodak camera or anything of that technology back then, but if this is what really did happen, then I mean, you know, of course, then I mean, that right there is something that is good to document, that while they were both under the impression of THC, they, of course, had seen this Goatman. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe it wasn't. But let me know what you guys think of that story, too. So, this next story, this was posted about around this time, I'd have to say 1987, because this is an older article story. This is from the Unexplained Mysteries forum. The two previous were from Reddit and Phantoms and Monsters. But this next one is pretty interesting as well, and I want to get you guys' opinions on this one. I was recently discussing this with someone someday at work, and I decided to see if I could find any recent sightings of the Goatman. I came across an old topic here in 2006 where a man told the story of what happened to a friend of his. So of the replies, he got to try to brush it off like it was a story made up. I've got a similar story to it that was relayed to me by two different people years apart in the same area. But I know for a fact that it wasn't something made up. Reality for one may not be the same for another. I believe that it's all according to the individual because each person's mind is open to different things. I have seen things myself that cannot be explained, and I know that what I have seen, even though I decide not to really figure it out in a sense. My family was there, and I know that what I was sometimes we are lucky enough to have our own paths to cross with them. My family also witnessed because they got their own proof later on, even though it took about 13 to 14 years to believe in such a thing. I've learned from personal experience to keep your mind open to other people believe to be true. I believe that there are many different dimensions, and sometimes we are lucky enough to have our own paths cross with them. A legendary creature, the Fawn, made an appearance years ago in my local town one night. Ever since I was little, I kept hearing stories about this guy I know who have claimed to have encountered one going to his aunt's one night. Some people would laugh about it, and others would say they don't know what to believe. I finally met him when I was about 17. He's about 10 years older than me. I asked him about it, and you could see the fear in his eyes, like it was yesterday, even though it occurred back when he was a teenager. Not only that, but his whole demeanor changed when I was shaking, when he told me that he didn't like to talk about it because people made fun of him, ever since saying he was on drugs when it happened. But he said that night he wasn't even drunk, or under the influence of any substance. It was around midnight, and his aunt had lived down a dirt road. He was walking over there to spend the night. Just as he had got to the bottom of the hill, he saw what he thought at first was a man a few feet away. Then the thing stood up, and when he realized it wasn't because it was too tall, from the waist down, it was like a goat. He said at first he didn't know what to think, as he had just stood there staring at it in disbelief. Then he had heard it breathing heavily, and noticed that it was just staring right back at him. He said the thing charged towards him and ran as fast as he could through the woods. He said he didn't stop until he had gotten to the cemetery on the other side of the woods where his family lived. He said the next day he went back during daylight so he can look for tracks. The only thing left behind were footprints similar to deer but bigger. He swore to me that this was true, and I didn't for 1 second doubt him because I am an empath and I could feel his fear. Then he told me about another lady from town that saw the same thing a couple years later about 10 miles down the road on the interstate. I finally asked her about it the night before New Year's at a local bar, and she said that she knew what she saw, but she didn't really know how to describe it. Even though that we were about at this bar, this lady was not drinking because she was there with her husband and she was the designated driver. When she saw it, she said that she and a coworker were on their way to work one early morning when they saw this thing out of the woods. It stepped out. She said she slammed on her brakes and asked her coworker if he had saw what she saw, and he said yes, and he didn't say anything because he thought he was imagining it and didn't want her thinking he was crazy. She said the thing stood there staring at them and looked like it was holding something in its arms. She didn't get a clean look at what it was holding. Then, after it realized that they saw it, it turned around and went back into the woods. She said she floored the gas and did not stop until they got to work. She said that she kept asking her coworker, "What was that?" All he could say was that he didn't know and that it was not human. I asked her if it looked like a fawn, and she had no clue what I was talking about. I kept giving examples like Narnia and so forth, but all she kept saying was, "I don't know. I've never seen Narnia." I asked her how did it stand, and she said that its knees did not bend the way ours do, that it went backwards like a dog's. I asked her if it had any clothes on, and she said that she didn't see any, but it's covered in hair. She said whatever she saw, though, that day was not human, and its face reminded her of a human, but it distorted. She even said that she talked with her coworker about it every time she runs into him, and since it was years ago, they no longer work together. But it's like they've always said, never doubt the impossible. So, this is what I think. This one story, it could be a Dogman case, or it could be even a Goatman or a Bigfoot case. There's really no huge explanation on the way it looks, but with the exception of the individual who submitted the story about when he was going to his aunt's house and this thing's chasing him, and it looked a little like a deer. And then for the woman, when she's describing her encounter when she was in the car with her coworker, she mentions how the knees did not bend the way ours do, but went backwards like a dog. This is a similar case with Dogman, and there's been many cases, and I think for many who describe it, the knees bending back and the bones popping, or the joints. So, I mean, there's a little bit of why I thought it would be a Dogman case, but also at the same time, I think the way the story's going about more deer-like, more goat-like, and the guy eventually the next day went to go look for prints. So I think that there's a little bit of an interest in that. I think that there's more to it, of course, but that is to be determined. I think in many of the Goatman cases, though, it can be mixed as a Bigfoot case, or it can be mixed as a Dogman case, but let me know what you guys think of that one case. That was pretty interesting. This next one we're going to talk about, it's one that I think is pretty interesting, and this one is the Goatman, or the story at least, and let me know what you guys think of this story. This one's pretty cool. So this encounter happened, there's two encounters. The first one happened in the 70s, and the second happened in the 80s. In the 70s, I was a young adult and was about to graduate high school. I lived in Oregon all my life, but since I moved out at 25, I currently reside in Arizona. I have two reports of what appeared to be the Goatman creature, or something of that nature. Can you help me find out what this was? The first was in the 70s, and the second happened in Arizona, where I lived. I always felt like there was a connection with the creatures out there, but I am by no ways not much of a cryptid enthusiast. I'm actually pretty skeptical when it comes to Bigfoot. But when I had my encounters within a 15-year distance, I was kind of curious to figure out if these things do exist. My first encounter happened in 1971. I had graduated high school. I was celebrating with a few friends, and back then there were no big parties. You graduated and it was a celebration with family, but no heavy partying. It was small. We were all drinking, eating, and out back smoking cigarettes. My one friend brought some cannabis, and while I wasn't a huge pot smoker, I had some for the celebration. It was around nighttime, don't remember the exact time, that we had heard rustling happening in the woods. Now, we were all intoxicated and under the influence of THC, but we can tell when we can hear things or not. I had a very high location of forest in my backyard. We heard things all the time, but never seen anything. Me and my buddies were just quiet when we heard it, and all of a sudden we saw two pairs of red eye shine emerge from the woods, and what appeared to have been something snarling at us. We were making eye contact with it. About a minute goes by, and suddenly this thing snarled and growled, and threw what appeared to be the mutilated head of a fawn. We dropped everything and we ran back into the house. My parents were asleep, so we made no little bit of noise, and we were quiet for the majority of the night. We shut the blinds and everything, and we waited about a couple hours before we were relaxed and cooled off. The following day, when I got up, hungover, and tired, I walked back outside to take a good look at what if I could find anything, tracks, or the carcass of the head. I was hoping my parents wouldn't have seen it, but when I got outside, I found nothing but a little bit of blood. Ultimately, I covered it up because I didn't want my parents thinking that we had gotten injured or hurt ourselves, or possibly far worse. I spent the final few years in Oregon wondering what the hell I had seen. I never went outside after 9 p.m., and if my folks outside were late or home late, I always told them to keep the lights on outside. My next encounter happened in 1986, and this was in Arizona. I'm about 40 miles away from Phoenix, and where I live is just a bunch of heavy desert and humidity. And one night, I was leaving my job. I had been on my way home. And among my way home, I had noticed what appeared to be some giant silhouette emerge onto the highway about 50 feet away. I was the only car out there, as it was no little after 2 a.m., and back then, the most you'd find are patrol cars driving around in the cool desert. This time, the creature was holding up something in what appeared to have been a weapon. It wasn't a gun, nor a knife, but holding some sort of sharp object. I can't explain it because it was so long ago. I didn't want to wait long enough to find out what it was or what it would do, so I decided to pull my car into reverse and high kick it back into town. I decided to take the long route back, and while it killed my gas, I wasn't going to stick around to see this thing attack me, or far worse, what it could do. That was my second encounter, and I believe the first was a Goatman-like creature, because where I grew up in Portland, many people talked about missing dogs and cats and other livestock getting killed. And one of the locals in later years I found out had seen a giant beast with horns, a goat-like attribute. As for my sighting in Arizona, I take it that the sighting was a coincidence. Maybe they have them there. I never saw anything other strange ever since. I took that road even to this day. I still don't see anything strange. I just found it strange and odd. I believe these things can follow you, but I wasn't under the impression that it would escalate to seeing it on 2 sporadic occasions. The Arizona one looked like it was 8 to 10 feet tall, had some monstrous gaze in its eyes. Red eyes. Very bloodshot eyes. I find the 2 encounters to be quite interesting. The first one, you have somebody who clearly is seeing this thing, right? They're all about partying, and then they have this fawn head, or what appeared to have been a deer head, just get thrown at them. Now, you don't hear cases of cryptids throwing their what they kill, so that was kind of interesting. I found that to be rather strange and scary at the same time. I guess, that was a sign of saying, this creature had just killed something, and it probably just wanted to eat alone, and you were invading its territory. We were watching it, even though it was in its territory. There could have been more to it. And the second one was just kind of interesting and rather coincidental. If whatever was holding sharp object, I would only think it maybe have been either a hatchet or something, but he said it was not a knife, so maybe it was something else. I don't think it was a cactus or anything. I'm going to read you one more report, and I want to let me know what you guys think about this one. This report goes way back, and let me know what you guys think. My name is Rose. I'm going to give you my fake name because I am keeping my identity withheld. I've had this on and off reoccurrence of dreams where this mysterious Goatman-like creature is in him. I call it the Goatman because it looks like an angry billy goat, but it has the body structure of a man. You know how goats look at you? They look stupid, right? Well, this thing looks mean and pissed off, and I fear it's something more. I've had dreams where I'm running in a forest, naked, and all of a sudden I see this giant creature. And this creature comes from the other side and approaches me. And at first I'm curious of me, then it grabs me and pushes me down on the ground and prepares to mount me. I awaken and in fear, I'm glad to see the 4 walls that surround me. One night I was with friends and we were going to the mall and gave a few drinks at a local Hawaiian bar. Mind you that this sighting took place in Mississippi. One night we decided to go to one of the beaches off the coast, a little intoxicated but also relaxed enough and just relaxing on the beach. 4 hours go by, and after being a little out of it and just relaxing, we decided to leave. I was in my friend's Honda Accord, and I was the passenger. I was driving back to the rural beauty of Mississippi, where the girlfriend in the back screams, "Holy crap," and something from behind just digs into the back of my friend's car. Screech marks like Freddy Krueger. My friend freaked out, and my friend who was driving decided to floor it, going 65 miles per hour and even more on this dark road with the lights on. With all of us terrified, my one friend points out that it's coming back. It's coming back. This creature's chasing us, and the car's going almost 70 Parkway miles, mind you. This creature is running like an athlete who took a fair dose of steroids and pre-workout. Then this creature's got on the side of the road, and we're going as fast as we could, and this creature's running up on the side, close to me. And I tried my hardest not to turn my head to look at it, but I couldn't bear it, and I had to see it. I turned my head to the window, and I see this monstrous-looking thing just staring at me. The teeth is out, the eyes were blue, and we saw another stop sign. And this time my girlfriend was going to run it. But then the creature stopped, and we floored the brakes just in time, as another car had actually emerged with its lights, and it was going straight. We had made a left, and we proceeded to get out of there. The creature we didn't see afterwards, and I don't know what I saw that night, and I have never seen it again. It should be well noted that I had a dream prior about the Goatman, not in a similar stance, but one where I was being chased by it. Could that have been an omen or a preparation for my encounter? Perhaps.
The description, I'd say it looked 8 to 10 feet tall off the ground, had blue eyes and a devil-looking horns, and it looked very mad. My girlfriend's car was scratched, and she later told her family that it happened at the mall, which they strongly did not believe. I don't know what it was, but all I know what it was something. I still have the dreams, but haven't had it impact me like it did. You have a case here of somebody who's seeing this thing, and it has a good look at it. It's very similar to that Mothman case I talked about last week. And she's very terrified of it. She doesn't know what it is. She has the slightest clue what this thing is or what she had seen. So it's a very interesting case, I have to say. I mean, this is one of those stories that really, for what it's worth, it's one where there's dreams of impact of what this thing does, and then there's also the occurrence where this thing is just, of course, coming at somebody, and it's a very creepy substance. It's a very creepy take, I guess you could say, for the lack of a better term. So, that's that story. I'm not going to go any further with any more stories. Basically, we've kind of covered the body gist of our show tonight, discussing this thing, and very much so, very cool. So now I want to talk about the different variations of the Goatman. Now, there's a few different variations. There's not really too much to talk about here with each of these variations. I believe there's at least 4 counting the Maryland Goatman. But there's a pretty interesting selection of variations, so let's get into them. The first one is the Waterford Sheepman. Now, this is an abominable creature that terrorized the small rural town of Waterford, Pennsylvania in the early 70s. It lurked in farm fields, stalking the unwittingly animal in a desire to tear it apart and feed on its flesh and blood, in the most exaggerated description I've seen of this thing. Marilyn knew of the Goatman legend as a teenager in the 70s, but along with the stories, she also has seen with her own bright eyes on one occasion. Now, this is a story about the Waterford Sheepman. She said that she lived on Baghdad Road, and she saw this figure running across the dirt road at one point near the old sawmill. She remembers that at one time there was so much talk about the legend, with many people catching a glimpse of the creature darting across the road and into the brush along farm fields. She had a second encounter with the monster when she was 17. He was there one night, and I drove home right before I turned into my driveway, and there he was, running across the road and into the woods. So the Waterford Sheepman. It sounds like this is more of a different hybrid variation with the goat-like attributes, but I guess with more fur, and looks like a sheep, I guess. It still has that same attitude. There have been reports of that seen before, even in Virginia with the sheep squatch, another variation people have reported to be. And I'll talk about the sheep squatch on a different episode. But again, another series of events here where people have seen it, and of course, the explanation purpose-wise, I mean, the Waterford Sheepman sounds pretty interesting. We already talked about the Maryland Goatman, and I think we've already kind of explained it furthermore. That was another variant, but I guess for the sake being that, of course, the biggest and most largest of these bodies of sightings, it's one of interest. But the next one comes from Kentucky. This is the Kentucky Goatman. This is the Pope Lick Monster, they call it. Legendary part man, part goat, and part sheep creature reported to live beneath the Norfolk Southern Railroad trestle over Floyd's Fork Creek in Fisherville area of Louisville, Kentucky. In most accounts, the Pope Lick monster, named after the Pope Lick Creek below the Pope Lick train trestle, appears as a human-goat hybrid with a grotesquely deformed body of a man. It has a powerful fur-covered goat legs and an alabaster skin face with an aquiline nose, wide and set eyes. Short, sharp horns and protrude to the forehead, nestled in a long, greasy hair that match the color of its fur and legs. This next one is kind of almost like a bit of a fable. Almost, but it's been described as said to be a 7 feet tall and deranged cow-looking thing. They call it the Proctor Valley Monster. The legend of the Proctor Valley Monster grew as it was described as a 7-foot tall hairy hominid, like a Bigfoot, and sometimes like a cow-like animal with its body parts in the wrong place. The Proctor Valley Monster is assumed to be responsible for the livestock mutilations that occur every now and then. The Bonitas Museum in Chula Vista, and the casting strange of a footprint alleged to have been that of the monster. Almost identical to all the Goatman stories, the Proctor Valley Monster seems to be like a tale told around a campfire, just right for the Hollywood B-movie. A teenage couple go parking in the woods off of Proctor Valley Road in the southeast corner of the San Diego County of California. The car won't start, or maybe they had a flat tire, and the boy gets out to investigate, but he doesn't come back. The girl stays inside, terrified because she hears scratching on the outside of the car. Police find her the next day, still hiding in the car. The boyfriend? He's dead, torn and bloody, dangling from a tree. while his hands brush the car, producing scratching noises. The story sometimes has mysterious huge footprints found nearby. A local psychiatrist who once lived in the Alpine quite seriously claims to have seen a Bigfoot-type creature in the hills near his house. The doctor is shielded from publicity and saying that he wants to write a book on his events. But the third-hand accounts said that he described a 6 to 7 feet tall hairy creature accompanied by two similar critters. He made a plaster cast of the footprints 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. He also related many strange happenings and sounds around his home. Park rangers and other investigators could never confirm the sightings, but plenty of campers in the area and residents and even the sheriff's deputies claim to have seen one large hairy thing trampling the hills of Alpine. Now, the Proctor Valley monster, I think, is probably the most described. It's you have a case here of people who are seeing it, and you have this so-called case of someone getting brutally mutilated by it. And while some could be very skeptical of what that could easily be, I think in many of the cases we've looked at tonight, I think that it's no doubt that this Goatman cryptid is, I think, a more aggressive dogman, or an aggressive Sasquatch in a sense. The Proctor Valley monster sounds to be a little bit in between the Popelic monster, but any of these cryptids could really be harm you. I mean, for what we can say here, I think the sheepman probably could be the most least of the common, but when you hear reports of someone getting slaughtered, and I believe that could be the case, but not really discussed, but when you have park rangers who are not saying anything, and we think of LBL, right? We think of the cover-up that they have going on there, and LBL is being covered up right now, and these park rangers who listen to this show damn well know it. But the thing is that this is a similar case in Proctor Valley. So, what is this thing? Well, all these variants, what do they coincide with? I want to take the time now to talk about the different possibilities of what this creature could be. This is going to be a little controversial, but hey, I mean, controversy I think really does appropriate for what we do here on the show. So I want to talk to you guys about a little bit about this, and let me know what you guys think. There are some different variations of what this Goatman creature could be. So one of the most discussed things is it could be a forbidden omen. And perhaps maybe the Goatman doesn't want to hack us up with an axe or rip us to tiny pieces, but perhaps maybe the Goatman wants to help us. Now, I find this theory to be kind of asinine because a lot of the reports I've read tonight seem to have a foremost of it wanting to kill us, and it has some sort of aggression. In the case of the Proctor Valley Beast, if that story is true, there's at least that theory that this person can stand by, though, about this. So, in this story, the individual explains that she's had dreams of Goatman, very similar to the one I've talked about, and that whenever something bad is happening in the dream, the Goatman appears and swallows her whole. One time she had gotten the dream only to wake up to find that there was a stabbing outside her house that left a man dead. Another time she had a dream in college and woke up to find someone in her dorm had killed themselves. The worst instance that happened, though, was when she was babysitting her niece. She had given her niece a painkiller because of the massive headache and then went to sleep. She had a dream again, but this time her niece was in the dream and woke up before the Goatman swallowed her whole. She immediately rushed to her niece's room to find that her little girl was having an allergic reaction to the painkiller and that had been taken to the hospital. She strongly believes that the Goatman is indeed an omen, letting them know bad things are happening. So, in this girl's case, I guess she had a dream about the Goatman swallowing her as a metaphor for simply to wake up. And she wakes up and she has these occurrences where this thing seems to go ahead and warn you. In this case, she had a roommate kill themselves. There was a killing outside her house, and then the biggest one was, of course, her little niece who was sick and had a reaction to the painkiller. Well, that isn't the smartest way of going about things, I guess. That was something. So, a forbidden omen. What do you guys think about that? Do you guys think it's an omen? Do you guys think it's kind of, be a BS? But let me know what you guys think about that. Now, here is one that I truly think could be a very huge possibility. And I know it's going to get a lot of heat, but I'll explain why. Goatman could be descendants of the Greek satyrs. It's amazing how a lot of our urban legends are rooted in some type of ancient mythology in regards to the Goatman. His origins, of course, undeniably Greek, if could be, as it mostly resembles a satyr. And in Greek mythology, the satyrs were like goat-like woodland creatures who roamed the forests and mountains with their pals, Pan and Dionysus. I apologize if I butchered that last one. Overall, these creatures were known for their sex drive, and often portrayed with large, strong, throbbing erections. It is not a coincidence that the Goatman stories of today usually involve rape or sexual assault of some kind. So without trying to get too in detail, you have the Satyrs here, who of course in the Greek mythology were these giant woodland creatures, and one of the main inspirations for a lot of the characters in Warcraft and Narnia. And you have these highly sexually active creatures, and I mean, as mammals, a huge thing. So where we have heard these cases of Goatmen in dreams, or Goatmen proceeding to rape somebody. Now, I didn't present to you guys stories tonight that happen of someone getting raped, only in dreams, but it is, of course, of interest. I think the Greek satyr theory, though, works, and I think a lot of people believe it because, I mean, the Greek satyrs, they look exactly like the Goatmen that we see, and I find that to be pretty interesting, so it's kind of connected, similar in a sense. But I guess to summarize it up, though, I think for a lot of us, we just have to take a look at it and take it with a grain of salt, and I included myself. So what do you guys think? You think it's a Greek satyr? Do you think it's actually that? Or is it something that is totally far different from a satyr? But in this next one, it could be a Native American skinwalker. The backstory of this horrifying creature ties it together with Native American legends regarding skinwalkers, and of course, as you know, a skinwalker is somebody who has the ability with the dark magic to turn into something that is besides being a human being. To summarize it up, these creatures can transform themselves into animals as well as to cause general destruction wherever they wish to. They would. Of course, the whole backstory of them being witches, they would kill a member of their own family in order to become the skinwalker, as the tale goes. The frightening half-man, half-goat features, could that possibly be a skinwalker? I know for some people, if they've argued about it being a skinwalker, I am being one of them as well, but I think you just have to have enough of the information out there. I would like to visit a Native American commission and ask them about all the cryptids. I'm going to get a lot of weird faces and possibly not the right answers because of how sacred it is to talk about it. But I'm pretty sure that if a native were to talk about Goatman, I'm sure there would be some sort of a huge cover and a huge closing ear if it were to say it's Skinwalker. Because then that denies all the Greek satyr theory, the forbidden omen theory to an extent. But interestingly, possibly so. The next one can go on to say that it is one of the most straightforward origin stories of it being an animal hybrid. Now, there was a case of an origin of a man who was experimenting on goats in Maryland back in the 50s, and this is where it all started. He was working at a foundation society, and he became a goat man. Experiment gone wrong. It's like the Marvel comics with the lizard. And you have this case where somebody who was experimenting on animals, a scientist, turns into an animal himself, and this is his new body. And this is the shame and regret that he has, and this is why it's an aggressive creature, because it's disformed. It's a human being. But that's probably the weakest of relations. And possibly, so people have said that it's the devil himself. The devil's in a mixture. It's a hybrid of some sort. So it goes back to the Skinwalker theory. Terrifying creature that's a mix between a man and goat would be frightening to anybody. Some believe that the Goatman is the devil himself, wandering around Earth, wreaking havoc everywhere it goes. That it might be Lucifer. So what do you guys think the Goatman is? Is it a Greek satyr? I think it's a satyr. It could be a Skinwalker. Those are my big two right there. I think those are the big two right there that are more notable. So let me know what you guys think about that. That's pretty interesting. So now I want to put in my insight before we wrap up the show tonight and proceed to go ahead and explain a few things. So what I think the Goatman is and what I think it could be. I think the Goatman is indeed a Greek satyr. And it could be, even though that those creatures haven't been around in almost a long time, very long time. And, you know, could these be descendants? Could these be like similar to dogmen, like they're, or could they be descendants of a Canis lupus or a wolf-like hybrid? Now, that's of course speaking in the mythology values and the point of view. It could be a Greek satyr because of the way it looks and the way it's shaped. You have reports of people who've claimed to have been raped by them. I didn't mention them in tonight's show, but I mean, could they? I mean, obviously, I think so. I think they have some sort of ability where they can do that. I mean, I'm not trying to say for sure that, yeah, this is a Greek satyr and then, okay, it can do this, it can do that. It's just the tip of the iceberg, really. But, I mean, it's one of those cases where I think a lot of people, when they think about the Goatman, and they think a lot about, like, what it is, being a Greek satyr is something that could be the closest rendition, but it could also be a skinwalker too, and I'm under the belief it could be that. Now, these are the supernatural, or at least the spiritual sides of the hides of what these things are, but if it were to be a flesh and blood animal, you could say it could be an animal hybrid. But I think there's not enough explanation out there to figure out what it is because of the amount of encounters, but there's not enough evidence out there. And one of the things I wanted to show you guys tonight was an interesting photograph that comes from Maryland, actually. Now, this photograph is pretty interesting. I know I use that term a whole lot, but I mean, really, I can't go any further than say it than that, because it is a photograph that has some explanation to it. It may or may not. It could very well be a guy in an outfit, but this photograph here, and you can visibly see horns in a sense, of what appears to be the Maryland Goatman. You can see it, you can see the face right there, and you could see that there is something in this image here that definitely is big. So, what is it? What the heck could it be? I don't know. It's a very cool image though. Now, in terms of it being something of a hoax, like I said, like many cases I've noticed with every piece of evidence, whether it's Dogman or Sasquatch, if we don't really get a good look at its face, you can kind of see a face here. You see something. Could this be a typical guy in a mask? We very well could be. It's too far away for us to really get a good look, but you could see the face. I mean, I'm Photoshopped, so you could kind of get a good rendition. That's what in the sketch and drawing looks like. So it does look like something of interest, and I will admit it does. It's a creepy image, and one that truly does stand out. Now there is another image too of it, and this image here is a side view image, and this next one you can kind of get a good look. It does. You can definitely see the size of it. I mean, it definitely levels between the tree it's behind, and I wouldn't say. I guess you could say it probably stands about maybe 6 feet, maybe more, could be even more than that, but it's definitely big. If this is definitely from a far distance, but if this is a guy in a suit, it's a very good hoax, but it's unknown. And you can even see in the second image what appears to be hands or what fingers or whatever. It kind of looks like in the photo it's holding something, but I don't know for sure. Maybe it's around something and its hands right next to it. But let me know what you guys think of these two images. Is this a Goatman? Is this evidence of a Goatman we see here on camera? Who knows? But it is quite debatable. So, with the Goatman and what we've looked at tonight, I can go on to say that it could be a Greek satyr. I think it's a satyr. Creatures from back then, descendants, of course, surviving satyrs that have lived in the forest for years and have been seen sporadically throughout the U.S., but you could also say it could be an animal hybrid that escaped a facility, in which many do claim to believe a few of the local legends of cryptids, such as Mothman or even Dogman. There's been a lot of theory about that lately, about a mixture, but I think in terms of super soldier discussion, that's where it's more frequent. But, I mean, with all of these pinpoints we've discussed tonight, what do you guys think? What do you guys think the Goatman is? And with this, what we just showcased, with all the encounters and with all of what we've discussed tonight, what is it? It's definitely one cryptid of interest and something that truly just stands out. And with that being said, we're going to wrap up the show. But before we do go, folks, as always, I want to thank you all for listening in. I know these past couple of shows lately have been quite different, and we like difference here on the show. And we hope you guys enjoy it, and we want to expand and branch out. And with that being said, folks, thank you again, as always, Fringeaholics and newcomers. I hope you guys found the show interesting, as always. And like I said at the start of the show, we do have a few links if you can get in contact with me. If you wanted to get in contact with me, you can reach me at thevenomousfringe@gmail.com. We have 2 Facebook groups, a Dogman only group and a Venomous Fringe official group. Both groups are private, so that anything that you post in that group stays in that group. It won't be shown on any of your public profile. And if you keep your cryptid and paranormal lifestyles black boxed, then that group, it will be private. There's nothing no one will be able to see on your personal profile. And if it could help support the show, there is a link. There's a PayPal donation. If you're able to help us with that, feel free to. And folks, with that being said, I hope you all have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you next Saturday for our next episode on our next cryptid. And folks, have a terrific night.